You're all my lucky charms. I'm lucky you've opened heaven's portal here on earth for this poor mortal.
That was the closing scene from a film made at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, universally considered the General Motors of motion picture companies during the golden age of Hollywood. You saw the end title that said Made in Hollywood, USA. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. That picture and thousands of others weren't made in Hollywood, but in Culver City, a small town sandwiched between Los Angeles and the Pacific Ocean.
Hello, everybody. This is Heather Hopper reporting to you from Hollywood, that fabulous place where everyone wants to live but seldom does. Hollywood, whose celebrities were discovered in Centerville, who live in Beverly Hills, work in Culver City, and play in Palm Springs.
Hello, I'm John Carr, your host for Culver City, the Real Hollywood. Together, we will look at the 85-year history of motion pictures in a little town that few people ever heard of, yet which was home to 3 major motion picture studios.
Culver City, California? That means about 5 days before I'll get the money.
Thank you, boys. Where'll you be when I need you?
Right here.
Okay.
From the earliest days of filmmaking, Culver City was home to a great many film pioneers and creative giants. Thomas Ince, who built 2 major studios in Culver City, which would later become Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer and RKO. D.W. Griffith, Cecil B. DeMille, David O. Selznick, Orson Welles, Vincent Minnelli, Mervyn LeRoy, and Steven Spielberg, to name but a few. Culver City was also the home of Hal Roach Studios, Laurel and Hardy, Will Rogers, and the Little Rascals. Some of the most famous movie stars of all time performed in Culver City.
Culver City, the heart of Screenland, is an incorporated city of just under 5 square miles, lying 8 miles west of downtown Los Angeles. Before there was a Culver City, the area was known as La Bayona Valley. As late as 1900, there were very few structures in the midst of the bean and barley fields which covered the valley. In 1904, developer Albert Kinney had a vision of recreating the wonders of Venice, Italy along the Pacific Ocean coastline and built his Venice in America. Soon, an electric railway line from downtown Los Angeles ran through La Bayona Valley to Kinney's seaside resort.
The stage was now set for the arrival of the two men whose visions of progress were key in the development of the film industry, Harry Culver and Thomas Ince. Without Harry Culver, Culver City, the home of MGM Pictures and now Sony Pictures Entertainment, would have been bean fields, or would have been absorbed by Los Angeles.
Harry Culver was born in Milford, Nebraska, the son of Jacob Culver, a Civil War veteran who had begun his military career at the age of 16 and who had obtained the rank of general in the Union Army at the age of 20. Jacob Culver became a teacher in the Milford Public Schools and later served as the town postmaster. He was also a farmer, owner of a mill, and the publisher of Milford's first newspaper, the Blue Valley Record. He was described as a man of great determination and ambition, and his son, Harry, was just as ambitious and determined. After college and a stint in the Philippines as a newspaper reporter, Harry came to Los Angeles in 1910 and promptly began selling real estate for land developer I.N. Van Nuys. Southern California was in the midst of a real estate boom at the time. Streets and towns were being named after real estate developers instead of presidents and military leaders. In 1913, Harry Culver came to the La Bayona Valley, where he began building his dream city. This is Main Street in Culver City, one of the shortest main streets in the world, only 150 yards long. The first building to go up was Harry Culver's real estate office. Within a year, there were many other buildings, along with 150 real estate salesmen. Harry Culver brought a flair for show business into his real estate sales effort. Among Culver's innovations was a polo game played with Model Ts rather than horses, and the promotion of a marathon race from downtown Los Angeles to Culver City.
The marathon was held in Los Angeles at Pershing Square, and it ran out to, the course ran from Pershing Square around Culver City, circled Culver City, and then back to Pershing Square, and the awards and festivities were done later on that night.
In 1915, Harry Culver's real estate sales were a little sluggish. He needed to find an industry with which to build a solid financial base in order to build his dream city, and he found it in an unlikely place. Up until 1915, motion pictures weren't taken seriously by critics, the financial world, or the public in general. To appear in films was considered to be the lowest form of employment to which an actor could sink. The term movies was first used as a derogatory term to describe people who worked in the film industry. All of that was about to change in February of 1915 with the release of D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. The film's premiere was the beginning of motion picture adulthood. D.W. Griffith was considered to be the most important motion picture director of the early film era, and Thomas Ince would emerge as the period's most creative producer. Thomas Harper Ince was born in Newport, Rhode Island on November 6, 1882. Following the family tradition, he became an actor. He appeared on the Broadway stage along with William S. Hart, with whom he became good friends. Ince began working in film production as a $5 a day extra for Carl Laemmle's Independent Motion Picture Company of America, known in the business as IMP. Laemmle took notice of the young actor and promoted him to director. Ince left Laemmle in 1910 and went to work in Edendale, California, soon to become home to Max Sennett and his famous Keystone Cops. When Ince was asked to produce a Western, he persuaded the producers to add a touch of realism by hiring the Miller Brothers' 101 Ranch Circus at a fee of $2,000 a week. The circus provided him with 300 horses, buffaloes, covered wagons, teepees, cowboys, and 50 real Sioux Indians. The first film released featuring the Miller Brothers Circus was War on the Plains, and established Ince as a daring and creative director. Ince's other contribution to the American Western was to sign William S. Hart to a contract and helped create Hart's persona as the bad man who turned good in the end. Hart was to play that role first in the production of Hell's Hinges, and then reprise it over and over again in the next 12 years. Hart defined the classic Western hero as a loner, a stoic, and a killer. He made his last film in 1926, Tumbleweeds, which he produced with his own money at the age of 61. Hart would make one last screen appearance in 1939 when he appeared in the sound prologue to the re-release of Tumbleweeds.
The story of Tumbleweeds marks one of the greatest epochs of our American history.
Hart died in 1946 at his ranch in Newhall, California. At the time of his death, Hart's brand of gritty, rugged Western hero was revived by Randolph Scott.
I hate the wind that howls across the prairie. I hate to hear the coyote's nightly song. I hate the sound of 6 guns that they carry. Oh, I love the joyful sound.
In Abilene Town, Scott portrayed a fearless marshal in a lawless town.
With my Romeo, at East I was always repressed. That's why I love it out in the West. I love it out here in the West, because the life is free and easy. You can do most anything you doggone please. There's room to stretch.
Sorry, Rita.
Why aren't you in church with the storekeepers?
I was. Wonder Rita didn't slug you. She works too hard at being mean, Charlie. Real meanness comes natural.
Maybe I can fix it up for you.
The movie Abilene Town inspired the long-running television series Gunsmoke. For the next 16 years, Randolph Scott would appear in only Westerns and would be a major box office draw until his retirement in 1962. Los Angeles had a severe drought in the summer of 1915. Thomas Ince needed a stream for his version of The Last of the Mohicans. The only body of water available was La Bayona Creek. When Harry Culver saw Ince filming Last of the Mohicans on Bayona Creek, he made him an offer of free land in Culver City to build a studio. The studio that Harry Culver persuaded Ince and his partners to build in Culver City occupied 11 acres and consisted of 5 state-of-the-art glass stages. In 1915, the studio cost $30,000 to build. This was the humble origins of the studio that would become Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, the colossus of motion picture studios. For 27 years, Louis B. Mayer was the studio boss at MGM. Under his guidance, MGM became the most financially successful motion picture studio in the world.
He was a very warm, very effusive, very funny man. You know, I'd arrive at the studio and I'd walk in, and I suppose some grandfathers threw their arms around their grandchildren, others picked their grandchildren up. He'd come around his desk and take a bite out of my arm. And I'd say, what is this, the MGM Lion? And he'd say, yes, I am the MGM Lion.
So I said to Mr. Mayor, why do you want me to have a moustache? And he said to me, looking me straight in the eye, and he said, well, that mouth and those teeth, he said, you'd be much better off with a moustache. So I said, Mr. Mayor, really? And he said, yes. He said, look, I told John Gilbert to grow a moustache, I told Bill Powell to grow a moustache, and he's giving me all this sort of thing. He said, you know, I'm a star maker.
I walked into the office, Ida Coverman, who was his aide, and she okayed everything. She sat down and talked to me and told me what to say, how to say it, so that we wouldn't upset him. And I walked in, and the first thing he said to me was, God, you look just like your uncle.
My contract read that I would have a television and radio clause. And so every time they'd come up, they'd say, what do you mean a television clause? I says, television's coming. So they waited like 3 months, and finally they put the clause in. Every time they picked up an option, I'd look to see if the television clause was in. So they weren't too fond of television. So I went in one day and I said to Mr. Mayor, I'm going on the Milton Berle program. He says, none of our stars goes on television. I says, you better get out a hot iron and watch those invisible letters come up on that contract. So I was the first one to get that. Then later, one day I saw him on the lot, and he says, saw your television show. He says, but you're blowing the whole thing. Number one, in those trailers that you do advertising the show coming next week, don't be in them. Let the guest stars say, this week I'm working with Red Skelton. He says, then it has power behind it. I said, oh. He says, another thing, I never know when the commercial's over. Why don't you say Act 1, Act 2, Act 3? So I did. That was Mr. Mayer's thing.
He always called me his boy. He didn't have any sons. He just had daughters. The last time I saw L.B. Mayer was in London, England. I was there with Vic Orsatti, and he said, oh, here's my boy. I'll never forget that. And he died not too long after that.
It's a holiday today, the wedding of the painted doll.
During the golden age of MGM, Arthur Freed produced dozens of great musicals. Freed's philosophy was to hire the best people from New York's Broadway theaters and let them do their creative best to produce entertainment that appealed to a broad audience.
Can't help loving that man of mine.
He just keeps rolling. He just keeps rolling.
come true. Seems as though I'll ever be blue.
He just keeps rolling
Now, Arthur Freed came to the studio in the 20s, and towards the end of the 30s, he wanted to do something else than just write lyrics and compose songs, so he became a producer.
It was Freed's philosophy and practice that helped make MGM the greatest song and dance studio, and the Freed unit the most successful musical team in the business. Early in 1915, Thomas Ince, New York financier Henry Aiken, Max Sennett, and D.W. Griffith joined together to form Triangle Films. Their slogan was, "Triangle is the sign that says, come in." The new team proudly announced Triangle would take the greatest stars of the stage and their greatest plays and translate them to the screen in productions that established new standards. Triangle stock was listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Motion pictures had now become one of America's leading industries, and Triangle helped put Culver City on the map. Triangle signed Douglas Fairbanks, who was one of Broadway's youngest leading men. Fairbanks' first picture for Triangle was The Lamb, adapted from Fairbanks' own play, The New Henrietta. At the same time, famous impresario Roxy Rothafel wanted to open his ornate Knickerbocker Theater in New York with the latest picture from Griffith. The only picture that was available was The Lamb, starring Douglas Fairbanks. The opening night celebrity audience included newspaper giant William Randolph Hearst and humorist Irving S. Cobb. The audience attended in full evening dress and paid $3 a ticket. The critics' praise for The Lamb was unanimous. It became a smash hit. Triangle would soon announce that it would produce $2 a seat films, an unheard of price before that. Fairbanks' contract was renegotiated, and he went on to appear in 13 films for Triangle, including Flirting with Fate. In this 1916 film, Fairbanks was not the suave, self-assured hero, but a bumbling Walter Mitty-ish character, a painter who can't sell a painting. In order to romance the girl of his dreams, he becomes a correspondent school detective and imagines himself into all kinds of difficulties. Fairbanks' severest critic was D.W. Griffith, who called him a jumping jack and said he was probably best suited for Max Sennett's Keystone Cops. The public would prove Griffith wrong. By the end of 1916, Fairbanks was one of the 3 most popular stars in the world.
He was just as popular in China or Korea or South America as he was here, because the picture told its own story.
His son, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., recalled his relationship with his father.
I asked him one time, what would you like to have been called if your name wasn't Douglas? He thought a minute and he said, I think it'd be Pete. So I said, fine, I'll call you Pete, because he didn't know whether he wanted to be called Dad after I grew up so much.
During a Liberty Bond tour, Fairbanks met and fell in love with America's sweetheart, Mary Pickford. Puritanical America forgave their divorces, and they remained as popular as ever over the next decade. Fairbanks would quarrel with executives at Triangle over artistic control of his films and eventually would leave to form the Douglas Fairbanks Motion Picture Company.
He did everything himself. He wrote the story, created it, told the director how to direct and what to direct, what the sets should look like. Complete producer of his own films.
Fairbanks and Mary Pickford would join Charlie Chaplin to form United Artists in 1919. Executives at Triangle and other studios would exclaim, "The inmates have taken over the asylum." Fairbanks and Little Mary would reign through the next decade as the movie's first royal family.
He and Mary Pickford certainly were tremendous stars, and they were multi-millionaires. Today they would be billionaires, probably.
Civilization was the masterwork of Thomas Ince, who produced this daring epic in 1916. Civilization was a provocative anti-war epic rivaling The Birth of a Nation in scope. In this scene, a U-boat commander has a vision of the horror he will inflict on an unarmed passenger ship and sinks his own U-boat instead. President of the United States Woodrow Wilson appeared in a foreword to the film, which Ince filmed at Wilson's summer home. Wilson used the film to campaign for president in 1916. Its message of neutrality was lost on American audiences, as American sentiment turned against Germany in 1917. William S. Hart wanted to produce his own films, as Fairbanks was doing, so he would leave Triangle. Ince and financier Harry Aiken would quarrel, and Ince would depart the studio. By 1919, Triangle would cease to exist, and the studio property would be purchased by the Goldwyn Company.
Only 800 yards down the street from Triangle stand the Culver Studios, which have housed many of the world's greatest filmmakers.
In 1918, Harry Culver decided he wanted a second studio in Culver City. He asked Thomas Ince to come back and give it another try. But Ince swore he would never again own a movie studio. Culver proposed that he would finance the building of a studio if Ince would sign a 5-year lease. Ince agreed, and Culver used Ince's down payment to purchase the property. Culver then financed the building of the studio with 5 mortgages, and then convinced Ince to purchase the studio after all. Thomas Ince was a leading pioneer in the development of motion picture production as an industrial process.
People like D.W. Griffith and other early pioneers of the period were more, quote, auteurs. An auteur is a director that really just does it on his own, and if he steps away from the project, the whole project dies. Well, of course, these big companies, which were funded by money from Wall Street in later years, could not afford to have a director just decide to step away.
As early as 1913, Ince was providing his directors with detailed shooting scripts and insisted they follow them. This rarely seen film, made in 1923 to promote Ince's productions, shows how he developed his studio in just 3 short years. Here we see sets being designed, constructed, and made ready for production. A wardrobe department, filming on location, Ince viewing dailies at the end of the day, and Ince at home with his wife and family. The last picture personally produced by Ince was Anna Christie, starring Blanche Sweet. It was the first time that a work by Eugene O'Neill was brought to the screen. The critics were nearly unanimous in their praise for the film, Ince attended the premiere of Anna Christie only 1 week before he was stricken with his fatal illness. In November of 1924, Ince was invited to a weekend party aboard William Randolph Hearst's yacht. He was to produce a series of films with Marion Davies based on short stories that had appeared in Hearst's Cosmopolitan magazine. During an evening dinner party, Ince became ill with what was described as a thrombosis. He was taken off the boat and rushed to a hospital for treatment. He died at home in his bed on November 19, 1924, with his wife and family at his side. All sorts of wild stories and rumors appeared about how Ince died, and to this day, many believe that he died of foul play.
The story I heard was that he was thrown over the railing. I never found out who threw him over.
The truth was that he died at home in bed.
In front of his whole family, children, everybody was there when he died of another coronary. So to have this story come out that he was shot and murdered is a terrible insult not only to the family but to Ince's memory. And unfortunately, Ince is remembered to this day for this so-called murder as opposed to his great accomplishments as being a great pioneer filmmaker.
In a sense, Thomas Ince is still with us today. Though barely remembered except by film historians, he gave to a fledgling industry a position of importance and power even by today's standards. He never went to film school, and he had no mentors to show him the ropes.
After Thomas Ince's death in 1924, his widow appealed to Cecil B. DeMille, who many people have called the founder of Hollywood, to buy Ince's Culver City studios. DeMille had directed The Squaw Man, the first feature film made in Hollywood in 1913 at the Jesse Lasky Barn on Sunset Boulevard. DeMille was a restless man with incredible energy. In 1918, he nearly walked away to become a major force in the fledgling aviation industry. In May of 1919, he founded Mercury Aviation Company, America's first regularly scheduled airline, with a landing field at Wilshire Boulevard and Fairfax Avenue in Los Angeles. His dream was to link California to the East Coast by air, but the necessary government subsidies and contracts never materialized, and in December of 1921, he was forced to liquidate his company. His airfield would later become part of the Miracle Mile, one of the most expensive pieces of real estate in Los Angeles. When DeMille was approached by Mrs. Ince to buy the Culver Studios, he had been with Paramount Pictures and Adolph Zukor for 12 years. DeMille had an extraordinary career in the motion picture business, directing blockbuster films in every decade of the 20th century, from the teens through the 1950s. DeMille didn't have the financial resources to purchase the Culver studio outright, and tried to persuade Paramount chief Adolph Zukor to put up the money to create a DeMille Paramount studio in Culver City. When Zukor turned him down, DeMille turned to the international film distribution and manufacturing company, Pathé. He negotiated a deal where Pathé put up the money to buy the Ince studio and make DeMille's studio head. Producers Distributing Corporation was formed to distribute the studio's films as a subsidiary of Pathé. DeMille now found himself head of the studio as well as producer-director there.
C.B. DeMille had just bought the property that Thomas Ince used to own in Culver City, and he was forming his own studio, and he wanted a kid actor. So he signed me up, and I had a 5-year contract with him. At his own studio, he was like God, you know, and his projects took priority over everything else. But when he was not on the set, he was a very nice, warm, friendly man. My favorite person that I ever worked with was William Boyd, long before he became known as Hopalong Cassidy. Over Bill's marriages, he only had one child, a son, who died at the age of 9 months. And I always felt over the years that we worked together that he was treating me like the son that he wished he still had. And I really adored the man. He was really a pleasure to be with.
DeMille's first effort in Culver City was The Road to Yesterday, starring William Boyd, who would star in several other films for DeMille, and in the late 30s and 40s become immortal as Hopalong Cassidy. The Road to Yesterday was a commercial and critical flop, and an expensive one. DeMille had planned to shoot his next film, The Volga Boatman, in Russia, but because of the losses on The Road to Yesterday, he was forced to film in Culver City. The Volga Boatman firmly established William Boyd as a major star. Boyd played the role of Fedor, who became a leader in the Red Army during the Russian Revolution. While the interiors were filmed in Culver City, the Sacramento River substituted for the Volga in the film. Eleanor Fair played a Russian princess engaged to an officer in the Russian army. Later, it's Boyd's turn in the barrel, when he is taken prisoner by Prince Orloff, Princess Vera's fiancé. Just as our hero is about to be executed, the Red Army storms the village and saves the day. There was a happy ending in store for Fedor and Princess Vera, as well as the picture, which proved to be a huge financial success for the studio. A year later, DeMille would produce and direct one of the most popular films of all time at the Culver Studios, King of Kings. 2 sequences in the 2-hour epic were filmed in 2-strip Technicolor. The introduction of Mary Magdalene shown here as a glamorous courtesan, and the scenes depicting Christ's resurrection. DeMille's critics were ready to heap criticism on him, but were surprised by his tasteful approach to his subject. The lavish sets that DeMille built on the back lot of the Culver studio would go up in a blaze of glory during the burning of Atlanta scene in Gone with the Wind.
Pull that hose! Come on, get out of there! Oh, I'll get him! What? Get me down out of there! Oh, give me that hose!
Haven't left much for the Yankees to take, have we? We'll have to make a dash for it before the fire reaches that ammunition. Come on. Throw me a shawl. Sorry. You'll like it better if you don't see anything.
In 1928, DeMille, completely exhausted, decided to sell his interest in the studio and concentrate on his own productions. In that same year, sound would come into motion pictures and shake the industry to its foundations. He would produce and direct one more film at the Culver studio, The Godless Girl. Then he would set up his headquarters at MGM. In 1931, at the height of the Great Depression, his old friend Jesse Lasky begged him to return to Paramount and help save the studio he had helped to found. He returned to Paramount in that year and made The Sign of the Cross, followed by Cleopatra. DeMille would remain at Paramount, a giant in the industry, until his death in 1959. There was another famous studio in Culver City located at 8822 Washington Boulevard, built by motion picture pioneer Hal Roach. The Hal Roach studio is gone now, and all that remains is this plaque dedicated to the wonderful memories that were created here by the likes of Laurel and Hardy, Our Gang, and Harold Lloyd. Just a few of the famous comics who brought laughter to the world from this site. Hal Roach's life was as colorful as anything depicted in his films. He had met Mark Twain, been a mule skinner, cowboy, and prospector for gold in Alaska. In 1912, he answered an advertisement for experienced cowboys to serve as technical advisor on movies being made at Universal. In just 2 short years, Hal Roach rose from movie extra to producer. He launched his first production unit in 1914. The first star Roach created was Harold Lloyd, whose films at that time would gross more than anyone else's in the film industry. With Roach as his producer and his director, Harold Lloyd developed an exciting, sophisticated brand of comedy. Roach's success with Harold Lloyd helped him finance his studio in Culver City. The administration building was covered with ivy, and the picturesque little comedy plant became known as the Green Ivy Studio. It would be comedy's home for nearly half a century. People who worked at Roach during this first quarter century have characterized it as a wonderfully warm place.
Until I started into kindergarten, I was at the Roach Studio. It was my playground. And of course, I had the Argane children to play with as well. Everybody on the Roach lot was friendly. I mean, everybody knew everybody. It was like a big family.
One day, Roach looked out of his office window and saw a group of kids engaged in an argument in a lumberyard across the street. Watching those kids at play gave birth to an idea that resulted in the longest-running comedy series in the history of the movies. Movie fans delighted in the kids' antics for nearly a quarter of a century as Our Gang Comedies. A new generation of television fans would know them as the Little Rascals. From the time he built his studio, Hal Roach would make Main Street in Culver City an extension of his back lot.
Main Street of Culver City was, of course, the main street of the city of Culver City. And there were all these stores, and that was a major area where they shot almost everything. Everything from Charlie Chase to Laurel and Hardy to Our Gangs was shot around Main Street as a small town.
Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy officially began their career as a team in 1927 and remained at the Hal Roach Studios until 1940.
Move it in front of the window where you can stand up. How anyone could be so stupid as to stand there and continually bump their head is beyond me.
In 2005, Laurel and Hardy were voted the 7th greatest comedy act of all time in a British poll by fellow comedians.
If I felt as bad as you, I'd go and drown myself. Stanley, you've given me an idea. What? I'm going to follow your advice. Good. And drown myself. Oh, wait a minute now. Listen, I was only kidding. This is no time for kidding. I know, but don't you think you ought to think it over? Have you ever been drowned before? I have thought it over, and since Georgette has given me the air, I have nothing left to live for. Oh, don't be silly. What do you mean, don't be silly? This is a far, far better thing I do now than I have ever done before. Well, standing so...
It was after dinner and I was sent to bed, but sometimes I'd sneak down on the stairs and I could look through into the living room. And all I could see was this dark cigar smoke coming out, terrible stench, and these people, you know, laughing and working out the gags. And then my father would go to work very early and then again meet with them for the final go over what they were going to be shooting that next. They almost shot for us from day to day. They didn't go by scripts like they do today. That's all planned out way ahead and schedules and all. Everything was subject to change.
Well, how much do we get for overtime? There ain't gonna be any overtime. If you think that you're gonna get that much work out of me for 3 cents a day, brother, you are crazy. Is that so? Absolutely. Yeah, and that goes for me, too. Because we don't work for less than 25 cents a day. Do we, Ollie?
Laurel and Hardy's film Big Business, made at Hal Roach Studios in 1929, was added to the Library of Congress as a national treasure in 1992.
Pardon us.
Fans still come to Culver City to retrace the steps of Laurel and Hardy and the Little Rascals. They come from all over the world to swap stories, talk to surviving cast members, trade pictures and memorabilia, and pay homage to a master craftsman who for nearly half a century made them laugh.
During the 1920s, the storefront Nickelodeon gave way to ornate movie theaters that resembled Egyptian or Roman palaces. Stars like Douglas Fairbanks, Harold Lloyd, Will Rogers, and Charlie Chaplin became the most recognizable people on the planet. The early pioneers like Roach, DeMille, and Ince had brought forth a new art form. Most of them are forgotten today. Why should we care about these people who worked in films more than 75 years ago? Kevin Brownlow, in his book on the silent film era, The Parades Gone By, suggests the answer. Whatever future the cinema may have will be based solidly on its past. Time is a human conception, very much like a motion picture. It's all there, but we have to live it. And you cannot enjoy the last reel unless you know what happened in the first.
Up in the sky, I ain't had no loving since January, April, June or July. Snow time, ta'in't no time to stay outdoors and spoon. Shine on, harvest moon for me and my gal. Wonder what time the train leaves for Paris. The sooner the better for me. Say, which way to the depot?
Just around the corner.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Let no one pass through that gate, no matter what happens. Yes, sir. Come on.
Say, we're not going to take a plane, are we?
I should say not.
I wonder what keeps them up.
I don't know, but I know what keeps me down.
Me too. Good old terracotta for me anytime. Promiscuously.